In one of our journeys to India, when we were taking a pilgrimage group there every year or two, I can't quite conjure up what year it would have been. It was the year that Swami Kriyananda was in seclusion in a cottage in Rishikesh. Seclusion, it was kind of ha-ha seclusion, because the friends had arranged for him to have a cottage. And when we thought, well, he'll be in seclusion in Rishikesh, we imagined walking up the Ganges and being somewhere, but he was right at the ferry dock where the bridge came and the ferries were there, and his little cabin was right above it. Fortunately, he's very hard of hearing, so he could just take out his hearing aids. But nonetheless, he actually had a lovely seclusion in this little house there. And we went to see him. Our pilgrimage group went to see him, mostly Americans, almost always Americans. And he was just giving us advice about going through India. Someone said, how should we travel? He says, the best way to travel in India is with your eyes closed. And then he explained that in both ways. One was so as not to get distracted, especially if you were a Westerner and weren't accustomed to that part of the world, but also because it's the inward vibrations that matter. And we went through a walk through the town of Rishikesh, actually going to Shivananda Ashram to see Swami Chidananda. There's many things I can say here, but this is all for a very tiny point. Swami was commenting that walking through the streets of Rishikesh, you think if this was a place in the USA, there would be no trash on the street, everything would be picked up, everything would be orderly. And then Swami made the simple comment, and then what you would have would be clean streets. And the question is, like, what is it that we really want out of life? We put an enormous amount of energy on this side of the world. The world's becoming the same everywhere, to have clean streets. And yes, we have clean streets, right? And when we die and go to heaven, I'm sure that God and Guru says, were the streets clean? And we said, yes, we had clean streets. I mean, this is what the Bhagavad Gita is saying to us, that those who worship the lesser gods go to the lesser gods. Whatever you focus your attention, however you spend your energy, however you spend your money, however you spend your time, that's who you end up being. And there are countless opportunities, and I like the streets being clean. When I first went, I was thinking about this the other day. The first time we went to India, for myself, I'd hardly traveled much at all, but my only travel had been in Western Europe. And so when the first time we went there, we went by Thai Airlines, and they have you stay a night in Bangkok for some reason, which we didn't mind at all. So once we were there, we decided we'd stay 2 nights because we were all Americans who'd never been to this part of the world at all. So it was all so exciting to us. Also, I'm a very simple person in my interest, generally speaking, but especially at that time when we were traveling in India, there were only 2 levels of hotels. There were the ones that the Indians felt comfortable in, and then there was the ones the Americans felt comfortable in. And the whole sort of middle range, which is there now, wasn't there. So we got to stay in 5-star hotels, which never in my whole life had I ever imagined such a thing. And we started at I think it was called the Royal Orchid in Bangkok, which was just fantastic. And I developed what I still have, which is a passion for super luxurious hotels, which is a strange dichotomy in my life, but I have it anyway. But we all went to Thailand, and Thailand was so exotic and so different and so just undeveloped and just a million things. After 28 days in India, Bangkok looked pretty modern to us when we went back, but nonetheless, there we were. But in all of that, let me just think where I was going with all these thoughts. Just in all of that, I know what I was saying. India looked strange to us, to me at first, but after a few trips there, when I would just arrive, I'd look out the window, this is what it looks like. We just become used to it because I stopped thinking about the lesser gods that the Western world worships, which is getting everything in order on the outside, making it look just fine, and started thinking more the way the Orient thinks, which is just from your heart, from your spirit. I remember being in India. This was many years later, but I was giving a satsang or something somewhere, and this whole crowd of Indian women just, I don't know what you would say, love bomb, that was the word. They just surrounded me. I didn't know any of them, but with this affection, this just willingness to open the heart, which was just unknown in the world that I mostly live in here, where we're just, we're a little bit more. When Swami would be on this dais sometimes, after the whole satsang would be over, we'd put him in a comfortable chair here, and people could come up these stairs and greet him personally. And often David or I or someone who knew everyone would stand next to him so we could tell him who was in front of him. And there were people, Swami spoke 8 languages very comfortably. And in this area, the Germans would come, the French would come, the Spanish would come, the Indians would come. And I don't speak any of those languages, but I could tell he would just assume a whole personality. And the Americans would be enthusiastic, but a little restrained. Oh, sir, it was such a very good talk. And he would say, I'm so glad that you enjoyed it. And it's nice to see you again. The Spanish would come and just sort of be very excited. And the Italians there was only one word in the Italian conversation, bellissima, bellissima. They would all say to each other, and then amore. It would just come out, no content at all. No discussion of the points. Just everybody's different. And we grow up in the culture that we're raised in. Swami would tell, before I traveled much at all, I didn't have a passport till I was 35. And he grew up speaking 4 languages, so it was very different realities. He grew up in Europe. But he would tell me, tell us, when I would hear him say, he said, you can travel around the world, and even when there's no racial characteristics, you can often know exactly what country people are from, because they worship what they worship, and they behave that way. And I didn't disbelieve him, but I also didn't believe him until I was traveling, and those people could only be Australians, and they have to be Israelis, and there's no question that these are Germans before they speak, because they're worshiping whatever they worship, and that's who they become. So, and this is not something that you sort of make a decision according to what your university degree is about. It's a decision about how you live every day and what you're going to do. And there's Swami wrote all of these commentaries. He wrote them as a continuous flow. And because we often have different light bearers in the position that I'm in, we tend to focus on one at a time. But there's a flow here which I find, especially last week and this week, since I've done 2 in a row on Sunday. It's very interesting. Last week, I'll fill you in for those who weren't here. If you weren't here, it was good that you weren't here. Last week is the really, really awful passage in the Bible where Jesus announces that he did not come to bring peace, but he came to bring a sword. And then he lists all the possible human relationships that will be destroyed if you become his follower. Mother and child, and husband and wife, and father and whatever. One of the ones I loved, Jesus puts in there, daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, which in cultures in which the married couple moves in with the husband's family, the daughter-in-law, mother-in-law is really a humdinger. And I thought it was interesting that Jesus knew that too. It's very interesting. The Vedas say that the closest possible human relationship is between a mother and a son. And that's not a social comment, that's just a spiritual comment, because you have both the complementary gender and that balance of that energy, and then you have the intimacy of the mother-child relationship. So Swamiji made the suggestion, he put it into one of the last books he wrote, which is called The Time Tunnel, which is really a story of 2 boys and adventure. It's not quite a children's book, but it's sort of a children's book. And they find a time tunnel, and they go back in time, and they go forward in time. I said to Swamiji, it must be so relaxing to write fiction, because you don't have to justify anything. It's just fiction. You can make it up. So he talks about how the pyramids were built in ancient Egypt, and how Atlantis fell into the ocean, and then he goes forward in time, and he can just put out whatever he wants. But it was all from intuition, but he just put it out in that way. And one of the things he proposes in there, that if a couple gets married and is going to live with the parents, they should live with the wife's family. Because the mother is going to be responsive to having another man in the house. And the two men are going to commiserate because women are crazy. And we all know that, being one, And so the men unite. But when you bring the extra woman into the household where the mother has the son, then there's competition. And it's very hard for the son to side with the mother. I mean, I've been to India, I've counseled people, I know this story, oh my God. I know my first response when people bring this to me is, that's why I was born in America. I'm not gonna do this anymore. But we worship all these things. The mother worships the son, that worships that relationship, and that becomes our reality. So Jesus tells us that, when we get onto the spiritual path, don't expect that you're just going to hold on to all your lesser gods. And he presents it. Now, this week, he says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. So, which one of these is true? The masters contradict themselves. That's why we can't just quote the Bible. We can't just quote the scripture. They speak to the reality of what is needed. And which side of this story do you really need? Because the balance of repudiate everything is that we become closed. And we don't really become open and freer and bigger. We just become smaller and more afraid. And on the other hand, if we go around thinking that what does it matter, there was a spiritual teacher who was immensely popular. He's less popular now, but his teaching was basically, just do whatever you want and we'll just call it spiritual. And he had lots and lots of followers. That's a real nice one. I'll just pretend. God is everywhere, so everything I want, that means God must want it. I mean, it's great. Your mind can just twist up in all kinds of crazy things. And what happens is, the gods you worship, you get. You meet. You live by them. And then you get to find out from experience. And authentic experience is the only measure of our spiritual life. I mean, because I'm so glib with words, I can say anything. But that doesn't mean that I know it. That doesn't mean it's true. Swamiji said when he was young, when he was a boy, he always had this great suspicion about logic as a source, as a pathway to truth. Now, he has a brilliant mind, and he's completely capable of explaining anything in a beautiful way. But still, you can't just go step by step and get to where you're going. You have to have other aspects in that. But he said he would use logic to make preposterous arguments as a child. His mother would serve him spinach, he said, and he didn't like spinach. Mother, you don't want me to eat spinach because spinach is green. And if I eat green spinach, I will absorb green into me. And green is the color of jealousy. And you've told me that jealousy is not a good thing. So no, thank you, Mother. I don't want any spinach. You can just play it out like that. However, you can't talk yourself out of being unhappy. You can't talk yourself out of being disappointed. You can't talk yourself out of having your heart broken. You can't talk yourself out of seeing other people suffering and feeling helpless to help them. These are experiences that transcend everything. This is reality. And all of us only ever learn from our own experience. That's it. And when you know it, it's so, you see, there's so many evidences of reincarnation. so often I'm in places where I'm sort of having to explain these things to people. I've been on the front edge of this work for 50 years. But when I first heard about reincarnation, when I was 18, growing up in a Jewish, culturally Jewish, not religious, but culturally Jewish family. Actually, I grew up in Texas. So trust me, in the early whenevers, when I was born, nobody was talking about reincarnation. So a few years later, when it came, when it was just breaking through, like basically the West-East separation was just cracking in the mid-60s-ish, I just thought, well, it makes more sense than anything else I've heard, because I'd never heard anybody say anything that made any sense to me. And I just sort of tried to start applying it. Things I didn't understand, immediate friendships, immediate aversions, all the longings for certain things. Certain people want to go off and, go off and just do the oddest things. They have the desire to go live among the tribe here and go study the butterflies in this place or whatever it might be. And we become passionate about these things. And if we think in terms of other incarnations, everything starts falling into place. And I just experimented with it for a long time. If this were true, then what would be true? But about ourselves, there's just so many things that we simply accept. I'm just not interested in that. I'm not drawn to that. And many very deleterious things that other people are drawn to, we're just not particularly drawn to. Once in my life, somebody was so annoying to me that I actually thought of shooting them. I've never held a gun in my hand, so I have no idea even what that would feel like. I've never wanted to. But one time I wished I'd had one. And I could feel how people would do that. That your existence causes me a great deal of suffering, so if you cease to exist, I would suffer less. Of course, I'd be in prison after that, and so, I would have a different kind of suffering, but at least I wouldn't have to deal with you. It's comical. But I could actually, just for a moment, I could really see how a person would actually run down that course. Why don't I run down that course now? Well, according to Master, because I tried it and it didn't work. And that's why there's the complete conviction that I don't want this anymore. So when Jesus promises, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these other things, he's promised us over here that we're going to lose all our friends and relations on this side. So what is he talking about over here? He's not talking about anything that exists in this world. He's talking about the only place that anything exists, which is inside our own consciousness. I always found it when I was younger. I always found it so weird that nobody was talking. I didn't even have the word consciousness because it wasn't there yet. That nobody was talking about the weirdest fact of all, which is every morning I woke up and I was still me. Like, don't you think that's weird? Even when I was living as a nun at Ananda Village, my first 10 years, I was in the little cluster up at Ayodhya, and there was about 8 or 9 of us. The group swelled and shrank over time, but 8 or 10 was about the right number. And every morning, under the very strict auspices of Seva, who was our mother there, we were all in that, or we had a teepee for a temple. We were all in our little teepee temple whatever time it was, meditating together first thing in the morning. And we got so close. We just lived together, worked together, and meditated together. And I always found it amazing that I would walk in the temple as Asha, and I would also walk out as Asha. Why didn't I walk out as Anandi or Parvati or Uma? It would just seem so reasonable, but we never did. And we're always inside ourselves. But there is at the same time that there is this extraordinary individuality, there is a universality to it, which is we all long for the same things. Everybody wants to be happy. everybody wants not to suffer. That's it. If you really look carefully at your life, every single decision you make, starting with your breakfast this morning, and whether you decided to come here or not, there's a piece of it that thinks I'll be happier if I do it, and I will have less suffering if I don't, or I do, or whatever it might be. Just like that. And that's, we just keep moving like that. And so, Jesus tells us, everything you're actually looking for, which is the increase of happiness and the decline of suffering, will be found in the kingdom of God. So the week before, when he tells us, oh, by the way, all your relationships are just going to turn into nightmares, and you're going to be all by yourself, and because what you're really seeking is not any of this. These are all the lesser gods. And it's not to say, and you see, this is the paradox that we have to actually get finally. It's not to say that you can't have a beautiful family and wonderful people around you, that you can't devote yourself to taking care of others, that you can't pursue your artistic or your ambitions. You can do all of that. You can do all of that as long as you know that the only thing that's really going to matter is my inner relationship with God. And if that is the God, literally, that I worship, then through everything else, that will be the thread. And because the inevitability of suffering is just right there. And so we need to have a relationship with the power that will not be destroyed by all the inevitable things that happen. As some of you know, I've spent almost 6 weeks very recently taking all these notes that I have from my years with Swami and turning them into a manuscript, which by the grace of God is in hand at this point, by no means publishable, but in hand. So I have all these wonderful things rolling around in my brain. And one of the just beautiful statements that Swami made, so simple. The worldly person, and I don't mean by that the person who dresses ostentatiously and drives a big car or a little car or whatever like that. That's not what it means. The one who looks to the external world for their satisfaction. Imagines himself, who thinks that the material world is the dominant world. I mean, it sure appears to be. I'm just going to digress, and I'm going to try to bookmark it because I've been forgetting things. Okay, I was talking about the worldly. This spiritual eye that we have up here, when we remade this altar up here, because this was a Catholic church and it looked quite different. And then we had a sort of temporary system for a year or two, and finally then we remodeled it in this way. And the idea of putting the spiritual eye above the masters, as the spiritual eye being the origin point even of the masters. But in most Ananda temples, it's smaller. Partly we have this huge backdrop, so you put a little tiny thing up there, it would just look like a dot. Nobody would even know what it was. But the idea of making it very large was not a common thought. And it was not popular even with our own people, even though it seemed like a good idea. It was just too radical. So a few of us, Lahari, I'm not sure whether you were part of this or not, but I laid out all this Christmas wrapping paper. We made this huge spiritual eye out of Christmas wrap and just tacked it up on the wall just so people could get an idea of what it might be like to have this. It was not a fine art piece, but it was a good mock-up for it. But then I had access to what we lovingly call the Swami card, which trumps all other cards. And he came to visit when we had that big paper thing up on the wall, and I carefully brought him in from the back door. So he looks at it, and he is struck by it, and I told him that it was a mock-up, and I said, some people think it's too big. He answered me, it should be big enough that you feel you can walk right into it. And so I was able to say, yes. And we ended up with that. Christmas wrap wasn't the final solution. But nonetheless, putting it like that, the spiritual eye should be big enough that you could feel you could just walk right into it. because that's where we're all going. When Swami died, I still remember over here, but no, I've forgotten now what I was saying. But when Swami died, he died in Italy on a Sunday morning, and some of us from around the world went to Italy where his body was in an open coffin for about a week, because people came from all over the world to say a last goodbye. And so I was there, and I was sitting in the room, and they were having the temple, they were having some kind of a service for him. It may have been the service that we were having there. And the loudspeaker was right next to me, and they started playing Swami's voice. And I was, of course, just getting used to the fact that he wasn't there. The fact that his body was in a coffin was a clue, but still, it wasn't actually till I went to his house that I realized he was gone, because that was where we'd always seen him. So I'm sitting in the temple, and his voice comes. And so all of a sudden, I think, Swami's there. And I'm looking at the big black box, and I was astute enough to realize he wasn't inside the black box. So the next obvious place to look for him was in the coffin. But looking even at his body in the coffin, he's not in the coffin. So then I progressed, and there was a photograph of him. He's not in the photograph. But then I went up to the spiritual eye. I mean, this is just myself, just like this. Oh, that's where we have to find him now. It's where we have to find ourselves now. Because anything else, here I remember the worldly man. The worldly man imagines that he moves through this world all on his own. I'm strong, I'm powerful. This is the experience all of us have had. Because that's the first thing. You wake up enough. First, you're just lazy and the world happens to you. Then you realize you can influence the world, and now I am the one in charge. I'm looking to the material world. I make it work like this. And he moves through, always attentive to how he's going to make his life work. And of course, underneath that, there's going to be this realization that I'm really quite helpless and powerless. Maybe my body rebels against me and I suddenly have some disease that's going to take my life. Maybe my children turn out to be lemons and they just don't come out the way they're supposed to come out. Maybe I lose my money. Maybe there's a depression. Maybe there's a war. Just make a list. But the worldly man is there doing it. The devotee realizes that I am part of a greater reality, that there is a divine force that is guiding my life, and that even this one incarnation is just part of this great story. And rather than trying to force it, we use all that energy to attune ourselves, to align ourselves with that which is trying to happen, with the unfoldment of my own destiny guided by God. And that's why Jesus can say, everything that you want will then be added to you, because what we really want is that security of knowing that we are not alone. I mean, that's the whole sorrow of life, isn't it? That worldly power that the worldly person first asserts, that becomes your prison. Your lonely prison cell, because it can't fulfill you, but the eternal God always can. Everything that we really seek ye first that inner kingdom of the divine, and what you are really seeking will be given to you. God bless you.
Let's have a moment of meditation. Amen.
This weekend, as you all know, we are celebrating Diwali in many ways, and we have a special treat for you, as you can already see. We are going to share a song of Swamiji, but perhaps in a way that you haven't heard before. It's one of my absolute favorites. It's a very deep and haunting melody, and I've always imagined it Indian in its flavor in my own mind, so you all get to hear it today. Life flows on like a river that homes to the sea. 1 hour bounding through mountain vales, 1 hour winding through a lea. None may linger on the way, none may coax time to stay. Fleeting scenes move by us like a dream. Cling not, none will be your own. Never grieve to be alone. Go within you, there's your home. Never grieve to be